Masechet Gittin Daf Ayin Bet Mishnah. Ze gitech imati, ze gitech mecholi ze gitech la'achar mita lo amar kelum. If a husband gives a get to his wife and says, "This is your get if I get divorced," it's a get on condition. You can put almost any condition into a get. Or if he says, "Here is your get if I die from this specific disease," not if I die in general, but only from this specific disease. Or he says, "Here is your get, and it will take effect after I die." All these three cases, he says nothing. This get is invalid because in all three cases, the get would only come into effect after he dies. But once he dies, they are not married anymore. So there's no reason, no need, no possibility of giving a get after a person has already died. However, if he says, "Mehayom imati, me'achshav imati, hareze get," if the husband, while he's alive, gives a get to his wife, and he says, "This is your get, and it will be effective from today, should I die," or "from now, should I die," then that is a valid get. That's a valid condition, even though it will happen retroactively, so they remain married until he dies. But at that point that he dies, then retroactively from the time that he gives the get takes effect. And this is helpful because, for example, it could save her from being tied to a yavam, but they don't want to actually get divorced right now. And using this condition, they can remain married until he dies, but then once he dies, the death itself was not what separates them, but rather the get will separate them, which would also mean she would not be able to marry a kohen afterwards. She would be called a gerusha, but at least she wouldn't have to deal with the yibum. Next case, mehayom ulachar mita, get ve'eno get, v'imet choleset ve'lo mitya be'emet. If he uses ambiguous double language, and he says, "Here is your get from now and after death," well, does he mean that it should happen from now, or that the get should only take effect after death? So since it's ambiguous, we have to be machmir both ways. It is a get and it's not a get. So if she wants to get remarried, she's going to require another get. And if he dies without children, then she has a safek zikah to the yavam. So he has to do chalitza before she can get remarried, and he cannot do yibum, because if in fact it was a get, if a husband gives a get and then dies even without children, there is no yibum there, but the prohibition of adayot against a sister-in-law remains, and so it could be prohibited to do yibum. It could be that she needs yibum, and therefore she has to do halisa. Ze gitech mehayom imati meholize ve'amad ve'halach bashuk ve'chala umet omdim oto im mechamat choli harishon met harei ze get ve'im lav eno get. If a husband says, "Here is your get from now if I die from the specific disease." Okay, if he actually dies from that disease, that's what we said above, that's certainly fine. Here's the complication. He gets up, and meaning out of his bed, and he feeling better enough that he can walk around in the marketplace. But then he gets sick again and dies. Then we have to assess, right? We have to send in a forensic team to figure out what was the cause of his death. If it was because of the first illness that actually lingered, even though he had he was able for a short time to stand up and walk around, maybe he felt temporarily a little better, but it was really from that original disease, never totally went away, and then came back with a vengeance and killed him, then it is a get, because he did die from that very disease that he had originally. However, if not, let's say he got totally better, and then some days later he got a different disease altogether. So it's true he died from a disease, but not from the disease that he mentioned at the time that he said the condition. In that case, it would not be a get. All right, Gemara. Alma imati ke lachar mita dameh. והדרתנה מהיום אימתי, מעכשיו אימתי, עלמא אימתי, לאו כלאחר מיתה דמה. We're asking a question on this phrase, imati, if I die, right? So is that like, when I die, after I die, it's just a condition, if I die? See, it comes up here, imati, and in this phrase, it's nothing, but if here, mehayom imati, then it is a good get. So we're asking about this. From the opening phrase, it sounds like imati is like the same as saying after I die. If I die or after I die are the same, and it's no good. But then later on in the Mishnah it says, from now, if I die, or from today, if I die, or from now, if I die. So therefore, if I die does not mean after I die. It's only a condition. It doesn't mean afterwards. So which one is it? Amar Abaye, imati shene leshonot mashma. The word imati is actually ambiguous. Mashma ke'ma'achshav or mashma ke'lachar mita. It can mean from now, if it's only a condition, right? This will happen from now, should the condition of my death come about, or it can mean after death. Imati, if I die, meaning after death. How do you know which one it means? It depends on the context. Amar le mehayom kemadama me'achshav dameh. If you add in the word from today, imati, then that's the same as saying the get should happen right now, right from now, and you're just adding a condition. Lo amar la mehayom keman amar la lachar mita dameh. But if you don't say the word hayom, just say gittin imati, then it has the meaning of it will only take effect after death. Good. Ze gittin imati lo amar kelum. Now, that phrase, this is the opening phrase, Ze gittin imati, the very opening of the first case of the Mishnah. So he said that's nothing because that it takes effect after death. Amar Rav Huna vecholeset. So Rav Huna is disagreeing, or seems to be disagreeing with the statement, because the Stam Mishnah says this takes place after death is 0, right? And therefore, should the husband die without children, sounds like since the get was 0, so then you could do yibum if there's no children. But Rav Huna says we're going to treat this as a safek. Maybe it's good, and therefore you'd have to do halisa. So we ask about Rav Huna. The Mishnah says it's 0. So why are you saying that maybe it's a good get, and therefore misafek we have to do chalitza? Answer: Lo amar kelum de asira la alma ulyavam name asira. No, when we say the get is invalid, it just means that she is still prohibited to marry anybody else. She's still married to the husband, but it does so to that extent. Is not effective. She cannot get remarried. But there is still a safek, and maybe it was effective, in which case she cannot be with the yavam. So even Rav Huna can explain that phrase. Now we ask, hold on, later on in the middle of the Mishnah, it says if the husband says, mehayom ulachar mita, now and after death, that's a case of get and not get, and that in that case you have to do chalitza. Since in that for that case, it says you have to do chalisa. So it sounds like the one before that, when you said lo amad kelum, is you can even do yibum. Otherwise, you should say the same phrase, choleset velo mityabemet. So we answer, you're right. Matitin kerabanan, v'Rab Huna de'amar kerabi Yoseh de'amar zemano shel shtar mochiach alav. In fact, Rav Huna does not agree with the Mishnah. Now, Rav Huna is an Amorah. He can't argue against the Mishnah, but he has a Tanaitic support. So our Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbanan, that who says, if you say, Ze gittin im mati, that get is totally invalid, and then if he should die, you can do yibum. There's no safek. But Rav Huna, he was saying his halacha, not according to Rabbanan in the Mishnah, but rather according to a different opinion, the Rabbi Yoseh. Rabbi Yoseh thinks that the date in the get, it proves when it should take effect. And so that since the date in the get is today, while he's still alive, and he says Ze gittin imati, it's the same as saying Ze gittin mehayom. Even though he doesn't say the word mehayom, the hayom, that today's date, is written in the get. So he's giving the get. Here is your get. It says in the get today, and this will take effect imati if I should die. and therefore it could be a valid get, but Rav Huna says, but maybe not. Therefore, you still can't do. She still can't just go and get remarried with this get. And if she would need to get another get misafek. And if he dies without children, you'd have to do chalitza. Okay, so now we say, hold on, Rav Huna, if you're really following Rabbi Yosef says the date in the get proves that it should take effect from today, and since they are divorced, she should not require chalitza, nothing. Let her just go and get remarried. Or maybe you'll say, Rav Huna is not sure if halacha is like Rabbi Yosef or not. He suspects that maybe it is, maybe it's not, and that's why he says sefek. You're right, according to Rabbi Yosef, if you really followed him, you would not need chalitza at all. It's totally good get. Rav Huna is just not sure if we follow Rabbi Yosef or not. But what that can't be. We have here the following story when Rabba bar Abu was very sick, and Rav Huna and Rav Nachman went to visit him. So before they went in to visit him, Rav Huna asks Rav Nachman, listen, we're going to go in and visit Rabba, and can you ask him please whether halacha follows Rabbi Yosef in this matter or not? Amar le Tama de Rabbi Yosef la yadana halacha iba'e mine. So Rav Nachman answers a very important statement. He says, I don't even know the reason, the basis of Rabbi Yosef's opinion. I should ask him if it's the halacha. This is a very important principle, that before you decide if something is the halacha or not, you should know what is the reason for that opinion, right? First, investigate what's the basis, what's the explanation, what's the reason, and then you can understand when someone tells you this is the halacha or not. First, investigate it. Okay, so Amar le Rav Nachman, Rav Huna says, don't worry about that. At be'amine halacha v'tamed Rabbi Yosef ana amin alach. You just ask what the halacha is. I know the reason. I'll tell you the reason, right? But right here, we're going to go and ask him, and I'll tell you the reason later. Be'amine, Rav Nachman asked. I'm not sure why Rav Huna didn't ask. Maybe Rav Nachman had a closer relationship. Amar le hachi amarav halacha keRabbi Yosef. And so Rabba bar Avu says in the name of Rav. Rav is the first generation, the teacher of all of them. And he says, yes, halacha is like Rabbi Yosef in this case. The date, well, we don't know why yet. Lebatad nafak amar le hainu tamad Rabbi Yosef tekasaba zemano shel shtar mochiach alav. And after they went out, Rav Huna said, thank you for clarifying that halacha is like Rabbi Yosef. And now I'll follow up on my promise that I'll tell you the reason. The reason of Rabbi Yosef is that the date in the shtar proves that it should happen from today. Even if he doesn't say from today, he just says Zegitech imati, but since in the shtar it says today's date, so we know it should in fact apply today. The bottom line of this whole story is that there's no safek that in Rav Huna's mind that halacha follows Rabbi Yosef, because he asked Rabba bar Abu, who said name of Rav, that yes, halacha is in fact like Rabbi Yosef. So therefore there should be no safek, and that she should not require chalitza. Why did Rav Huna require chalitza? Ela misapek ale I amar Rabbi Yosef be'alpeh I lo amar. Oh, the question is, would Rabbi Yosef agree that the date on the document is what we follow, even though the condition is only verbal? Maybe you have to write the condition in the get also. So for sure Rabbi Yosef would agree. In the get, he writes, this is your get. If imati, you write those words in the get, and then he gives it to him, and you don't have to say anything. He doesn't have to say anything at all. He gives her this document, and in the document it says this is zegitech imati, and it has a date on it. So then it's very clear from the document itself that the condition depends on the date in the document, and it will work retroactively from the date in the document. For sure, Rabbi Yosef would agree with that. But he's not sure, would Rabbi Yosef agree if you didn't write the condition in the get? You only wrote the date, but then verbally he said, here is your get im mati. Can you combine his verbal condition with the written date in the get? That's what he was unsure of. And that's why Rav Huna said you have to do halisa. But then we challenge that. Umi mesapek aleh, is he in doubt about that? והתנן, הרי זה גיתך אם לא באתי מכאן ועד 12 חודש. ומת בתוך 12 חודש, אינו גט. ותני עלה, רבותינו התירוה להינשא. ואמרינן, מן רבותינו, אמר רב יהודה מה שמואל, בדינה דשרו משחה, וסברי לה כרבי יוסי, דאמר זמנו של שטר מוכיח עליו. We have in a Mishnah, a little bit later on in this Masechet, if a husband gives a get and he says, here is your get if I do not return from now until the next 12 months. And he dies within 12 months, it's not a good get, right? He didn't say from now, so he dies in the middle. Now we have a braita about that says the rabbis permitted her to get married, presumably because even though he didn't say mehayom, if he said mehayom, even though he didn't say that, we consider it as if he said that, right? Maybe because the date is in the get. And now this Rabbotenu in this Baraita, when we analyzed it, we said, who is this Rabbotenu? And Rav Yehuda name of Shemuel says, it's the same people as the Bet Din that said oil of Gentiles is permitted. There was a time when the rabbi said oil produced by Gentiles is not allowed, but it was not sustainable, and so it never stuck, and so the Bet Din said it's permitted. Now, who was that? Oh, that was in agreement with Rabbi Yosef, and therefore, if that's the A equals B and B equals C, so that's the same Bet Din, and that was Rabbi Yosef, that means Rabbi Yosef is the one that said it's permitted in such a case, because the date in the get proves that it should happen immediately at the time of the giving of the get. And so, from the point of all this is that, even though this was only a verbal condition, right, because it's not written in the get, the condition is being said verbally. And the husband says, here's your get if I don't come back within 12 months. But the date is in the get, and the date is from today. And Rabbotenu, who is Rabbi Yosef, says it's okay. Therefore, we can prove that according to Rabbi Yosef, not only does Rabbi Yosef say that we follow the date in the get when the condition is written in the get, Rabbi Yosef also thinks that we follow the date in the get even though the condition is only verbal. And therefore, Rav Huna should have no safek. He should have said, you don't even need halisa. Oh, here's the Rav Huna's doubt. He knows that the halacha follows Rabbi Yosef when the condition and the date are written in the get. That's what he clarified from in the name of Rav, from his teacher on his deathbed. What he's not sure is, does halacha also follow Rabbi Yosef when the condition is verbal? I know that Rabbi Yosef would permit it, but he's not sure if the halacha actually follows Rabbi Yosef on that point as well. Good. Now we ask, Umi mesapek alev hamarabah, hareze gitech imati v'she'ani mati hareze get. Kishamut ulachar mita and ze get. Hold on, we have a statement of Rava, who's a little bit later than Rav Huna, but he says that if a husband says, here is your get if I die, or that I die, that's a good get, even though he didn't say mehayom. Nevertheless, we include that because it's written down in the get. So you see here, it's a verbal condition, right? Verbal condition, imati, or vishani met, should I die? And it's still a good get, even though it's verbal. We'll see. This is exactly the case. Now, if he says, when I die, after I die, then it's not a good get, because there he's explicitly saying it will only take effect after I die. There, nobody thinks that you can assume the date in the get. Good. Now let's analyze what cases Rava talking about. If it's the case where he actually did say mehayom, Rava didn't say that word, but let's say you think that he's just he forgot to say it. If that's the case, and it's according to Rabbanan, which, I mean, everybody agrees that this would be a valid get. Do you even have to say this? This would be obvious. Vatanan mehayom imati hareze get. It's right in our Mishnah. Rather, must be he did not say mehayom, and because Rava actually didn't say those words. And who is it following? It's only following Rabbi Yosef, because he's the only one that would say even if you skip the word mehayom, we can follow the date in the get. And here, even though it's verbal, the condition, and the condition is not written in the get, nevertheless, it's a good get. So we can prove from here that halacha is like Rabbi Yosef, because Rava gives a Pesach halacha like Rabbi Yosef. So what was Rav Huna's doubt? And the answer is L'Rava Peshita le, L'Rav Huna Mesapeka le. Okay, Rava decided that in such a case halacha is like Rabbi Yosef, not only when it's written, even when the condition is verbal. But just because Rava had made a decision about this doesn't mean that Rav Huna made a decision about it. Rav Huna was unsure. Rav actually comes after Rav Huna. And anyway, they can disagree with each other. They're both Amoraim. So that was Rav Huna's question. He knows halacha follows Rabbi Yosef when the condition is written. He wasn't sure in this case where it is not written. Okay, that's all one good answer. Or it could be Rava. He said his Pesach halacha only his Pesach halacha according to the Banan, and only in the case where it actually said mehayom. But nevertheless, he had to say it. It wasn't obvious because he was teaching something else. She'ani met ke imati dame, u'she'amut ke le'achar mita dame. He's addressing a couple of languages that were not found in the Mishnah. The language she'ani met, what does that mean? That I die. That's the same as saying if I die. But so if you say zegitech mehayom she'ani met, that's the same as mehayom imati, and therefore it's valid. And he wanted to teach us that keshe'amut is the same as le'achar mita, and it's invalid in those two cases. So that's what Rava was teaching. But even Rava himself was not talking about this case and was not talking about halacha Rabbi Yosef. And so Rav Huna's safek was, we know we follow Rabbi Yosef when the condition is written. He wasn't sure if we follow Rabbi Yosef when the condition is not written. Good. Now that was all one version of Rav Huna. Vika dematni la sefa zegitech la harmita lo amar kelum amar Rav Huna ul divrei Rabbi Yosef choleset. In this version, Rav Huna is not modifying the first clause zegitech imati, but rather the second clause zegitech le'achar mita. Actually, it's the third clause in the Mishnah. Right, zegitech le'achar mita, and this is a bigger chidush. Even though he says this will be your get after I die, which sounds pretty unambiguous that it will take effect after I die. Even here, and according to Tanakama, there it's zero, that it's totally invalid. Even here, Rav Huna says that according to the Rabbi Yosef, you need to do halisa should he die without children. Even here is a safek, because you treat it as if he said also mehayom, since that date is written in the get. So it's the same as him saying ze gitech mehayom, that's written in the get, le'achar mita, and that's why it's a safek. We have to do halisa. Okay, so that's the second version. Now we ask about that. Peshita midesefel Rabbanan choleset reshanami Rabbi Yosef choleset. Wait, wouldn't this be obvious? Because this is the same as the case of Rabbanan in the next part of the Mishnah that says if husband says gitech mehayom ulachar mita. We said get no get, and you have to do, if he dies without children, then you have to do halisa. So that for the Banan is the equivalent for the Biyoseh of this case, because even though he only said out loud zegitech lachar mita, but the date in the get is the same as saying hayom, and therefore that isn't it obvious that the Biyoseh would say choleset in a case of zegit el chamita, because that's the equivalent for the banan of saying mehayom ulachar mita. So that's our question. Wouldn't that be obvious? Why did Rav Huna have to teach us that? He had to tell us that because there is actually another opinion out there, that of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, who says that in the case like this, get mehayom ulachar mita, since he said mehayom, we can focus just on that word and forget about the lachar mita part. We're going to bring the source of Rabbi in a second. I might have thought that maybe Rabbi Yosef would agree with Rabbi, and therefore halisa nameh latiba, and you don't need anything. It's a totally good get. You can just go out and get married. Kamashmalan dela Rabbi savar la Rabbi Yosef vela Rabbi Yosef savar la Rabbi. Therefore, it teaches us that Rabbi does not agree with Rabbi Yosef. That we're going to see in a second, and that he teaches us specifically that Rabbi Yosef does not agree with Rabbi about that. Now let's see what we're talking about. Rabbi la sabar la ke Rabbi Yosef de katani kaze get lemeote ke de Rabbi Yosef. Ve Rabbi Yosef la sabar la ke Rabbi de katani kaze get lemeote de Rabbi. In the next two sources, Baraita, we're going to see Rabbi. We're going to see that they both say this word kaze. This is a get. And if you say this, it means I think this is a get, which excludes someone else. The Rabbi Yosef, he doesn't think this is a get. Rabbi Yosef used the same language, kazeh, I think this is a get. Why is he saying this meaning? And Rabbi disagrees with that case. So they are mutually exclusive. Each one has a kula that the other one would not agree with. Let's spell it out. Rabbi maihi detanya mehayom ulachar mita get veno get b'chachamim. Rabbi omer kazeh get. If a husband says now and after death, he's using double language. Chachamim say it's a get, but it's not a get, meaning it's a safek. You have to do chalitza. And Rabbi says, like this, I think, is a good get totally. So you see from this language that Rabbi says kazeh, right? Like he's pointing out, because he has to tell Rabbi Yosef, I don't agree with you about your case. I only think that this type of get is good, but not your case. So by saying like kazeh, that shows that Rabbi Yosef does not agree. And the other way around also. Rabbi Yosef mai hiditnan kitvu utnu get lishti im lo bati mekan ve'ad 12 chodesh ketavu betoch 12 chodesh untano lachar 12 chodesh eno get. Rabbi Yosef omer kazeh get. This is the Mishnah we just quoted. If a husband says to his wife, here is your get, if I do not return from now for 12 months, and he wrote it within the 12 months, but they only gave it after the 12 months, and he died in between, that is not a get. It's not a get because he didn't say mehayom, and he died first, and only then was it given to her. So it was given to her after death, and there was no mehayom. So therefore, it's not a good get. Rabbi Yosef, kind of like pointing to Rabbi, who's just a generation after, says kazeh get. In this case, that's where I think it's a good get, because there's a date written in it. And since they wrote it before he died, so the date in the get is the effective date, and it takes effect, even though they gave it to her after, it takes effect at the time that it was written, and that's before he died, and therefore this is a good get. But I don't agree with your case of, he says, hayom lachar mita. That is just a confusing case. He says both languages. There, I would say it's a safek. And so in order to teach us all that, that's why Rav Huna told us that according to the Rabbi Yosef, you'd have to, if he says ze gitech lachar mita, we assume it's mehayom. That becomes like a mehayom lachar mita, and Rabbi Yosef would disagree with Rabbi and say then that you have to do chalitza in that case. Next clause in the Mishnah, ze gitech mayom imati mechol izeh ve'amad v'alach bashuk v'chule. A husband says, this is your get from today if I die from this disease that I currently have. But then he got up and walked around in the market. It seemed like he was better, but then he died after that. We have to assess, did he get totally better? And then it's not a get. Or was he really still sick and he felt just temporarily a little bit better, but he really died from the original disease, in which case it is a valid get. Okay, about that, Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna has a lot to say about everything, every phrase of this Mishnah. So Rav Huna says, Gito ki matanato. Ma matanato im amad chozer, af gito im amad chozer. We have a rule that if someone on his deathbed says something, then we take it seriously. So if he says on his deathbed, I want to give a get, that has a similar rule to if he wants to give a gift. And just like if he says, I want to give a gift, and he's on his deathbed, but then he gets better, then he can retract that gift, right? I only was giving it to you because I thought I was dying, but now that I feel better, the get is invalidated. He takes it back. Same thing with the get. The man on his deathbed says, write a get for my wife, but then he gets better, then we retract that directive. Now, magito af agav de la parish kevan de amar ketovu af agav de lo amar tenu af matanato kevan de amar tenu af agav de la kanu mine. Rav Huna continues. We saw the statement already earlier. That just like regarding a get, even though if he didn't say a full directive, he only said write it, even though he didn't say give it, we still follow through with the rest of the process because we know that's what he meant. If a person is healthy and he says write a get, then all we can do is write it. We're not sure if he actually wants to give it. Maybe he just wants to have it handy and he's going to decide later. But if he's dying, and he says write it, then we assume he means write it and give it. Same would be true for a gift, even though the person on his deathbed only said give this person a gift and did not make any formal transaction, and they didn't do like a kinyan sudad and he took a handkerchief showing that he wants to give it, and nevertheless we continue the process and we make it the same as if just as his saying tenu, we go ahead and we give it to the gift to that person even without a formal transaction. Okay, that's what Rav Huna said. Now we have a challenge. Tenan, ze gitech ma'yom imati mecholi ze, ve'amad ve'alach bashuk ve'chala umet, עומדים אותו אם מחמת חולי ראשון מת, זה גט, ואם לאו אינו גט. אם עמד חוזר, למה לי עומדנה? It's a challenge on Rav Huna's first statement. Here he said that if a sick person on his deathbed says, I want you to write a get, and then he gets better, well, once he gets better, that retracts his directive, and that's it. They do not write a get anymore. After that, right, getting better, getting up out of the bed, walking around, is a retraction of his directive to write a get. But there's a problem because here in our Mishnah, it says that if a person is sick and he says, this is your get from now if I die from this disease, and then he gets up and walks around in the marketplace, and then he gets sick a second time and dies, then we have to check to see, did he die from the disease A? Then it is a get because the disease continued. So this is the challenge, right? Because and if not, then it's not a get. If he if it's from a different disease that he just died after he got better, then it's not a get. Now, if you say that once a person gets better, that's what Rav Huna says, then that directive is retracted. Then why do we have to bother checking if it's the same disease or a second disease? Amad, he got up. Therefore, once he got up out of his bed and he walked around in the shuk, that shows that he's better, and therefore his directive to write a get should be null and void, and therefore it doesn't matter whether he died from a second disease or even if he died from the very first disease that came back or that was still around and was lingering. Still, the fact is that he got up, and therefore the directive should be canceled, and it should for sure, surely not be a get. That's the question. Amar mor bered Rav Yosef mishmed Rava shenitak meholi leholi. So Mor, the son of Rav Yosef, says in the name of Rava that this Mishnah is only talking about a case, this Mishnah, when he goes directly from one disease right into another. He did not actually stand up and get better. He had cancer, and then suddenly he dies from an aneurysm. But he never got better in between. It just happened to be that he died not from this disease that he had when he made that condition. He ended up dying from a different disease. So since he never got up, that's why Rav Huna's law does not contradict. If he got up and got better, or if even just got up, then it would be canceled. But he never got up. He never got better at all. He went from one disease to the other. Then that's when we have to check: was the first disease still around, and he died from that with contributing factors? Well, then it is a get. If he died only from the second one and not the first one, then it would not be. That's what the Mishnah is talking about. Okay, Amad Katane. Hold on, that doesn't make sense because the Mishnah says he stood up. Doesn't that mean he stood up, meaning he felt better? And the answer is no. Amad mecholizeh v'nafal lecholizeh. Amad just means stop. Amad could mean physically stand up. It could also mean stop. It means that the first disease ended, and immediately he went into the next one. But he never got up out of his bed. He never felt better, and therefore we don't say what Rav Huna said that the directive stops. Right? It would not. Rav Huna's law would not apply. But if in fact he actually stood up, then Rav Huna's law would apply. Oh, hold on. Well, it says that he walked in the marketplace. So how are you going to take that figuratively? It says that's literal. He actually walked in the marketplace. Since he got up and walked in the marketplace, we then, and if Rav Huna is right, then we should apply Rav Huna's rule that the directive stops, because that's it. He's up and about. And the answer is halach al mishanto. No, it means that when he was walking in the marketplace, he wasn't walking on his own. He was walking with a walking stick. He needed to lean on it. He really wasn't a better. He was still sick. He was sick continuously the whole time, and that's why the Rav Huna's law does not apply to this case, because he was sick the entire time. And now we can learn, once we accept this, we learn a qualification on the rule that if he walked only with his walking stick, that's when we require an assessment, right? Since he had one disease, he was still ill, and then he got a second disease, so we want to see when he died, was it only from the second disease? Then it's not a get, because that's not his condition. But if it's really from the first disease that never stopped, then it is a get. That's when you have to make an assessment. But if he did not get better, even to the extent that he can go out and walk around on a walking stick, if he was in bed the entire time and went from one disease right into the other, then we don't even need an assessment, because in that case it's clear that he died from the first illness, which made him weak, and then brought about the second illness, and the first illness was an important contributing factor, and he really died from the first illness, and the second illness was just an even bigger complication, but it's clear that he never got better at all from the first illness, so then you don't even have to assess. And it is a good get, for sure, because the first illness was there the whole time. The only time you have to assess is if he got better a little bit, just enough that he could walk around on a walking stick. In that case, you want to see, is it really from the first death, and therefore it is a good get, the first sickness, it's a good get, or is it only from the second disease and it's not a good get? But if he got better enough that he could walk around on his own, then we would bring in Rav Huna's limitation that since he's good and he's walking around on his own, therefore that nullifies the directive he gave on his deathbed. Shmat mina shechi mera shenitak mecholi lecholi matanato matana. Now we're going to remember Rav Huna made a comparison. So should we learn from this that if someone was on his deathbed and he was sick with disease A, but then he went right into disease B, then his gift will remain a gift, right? Just like his get will be a get. And the answer is in. And Rav said this explicitly. Someone on his deathbed that had disease A, and he never got better from that, and then he got a second disease. His gift that he said when he gave the first disease is still a gift, because we assume that he wanted it to be given because he's going to die. If he got better in between, then we say, oh, he only wanted to give better, and then it's canceled. Once it's canceled, then that's it. We're not going to redesignate this as a gift. But if he never got better in between, then that original directive is valid, and therefore the get would be given, just like if he gave a directive to give his wife a get and never got better in between, then it is surely a good get. All right, all that is Rav Huna's opinion, but not everybody agrees. Rabba v'Rava la sevira lehu la de Rav Huna gezerah shema yomeru yesh get le'achar mita. Rabba and Rava do not agree, and they say that if a person was on his deathbed and said, write a get for my wife, and then he gets better and walks around, we nevertheless say, continue to give the get. Even though on a deoraita level they agree with Rav Huna, once he got better, that shows he only wanted the get to be written and given because he was going to die. But now that he's better, so then that directive is retracted on the deoraita level. But Rabba and Rava are afraid of the optics. People will look at that and say, oh, I see. If a person is on his deathbed and then it gets better, then the get does not apply. When does it apply? Only if he's on his deathbed and dies. And they will therefore come to the conclusion that the get takes effect after death. But that is not true. Really, it takes effect retroactively from the time the person said it. It's just that it only takes effect retroactively if the person actually died, but not if they got better. But people aren't going to be that sophisticated to make that distinction, and they're going to think that it actually does take effect after death, and then they're going to think that someone can give a get after death, and therefore midrabanan we say, even though this get is not valid, the rabbis say it is valid. Now this is surprising. Are you telling me that there's a case that on the Torah level there is no get, and she's still married to her first husband, but because of a gezerah that we're afraid what people will think, the rabbis come and say it is a get, and even though midoraita you're married to your first husband, we will allow you to go and marry someone else, which is on the doraita level, that's eshet ish, and the rabbis can allow that? How can the rabbis go and override a fundamental and very serious Torah law? The answer is in. Kol de mekadesh adatad rabbanan mekadesh v'afkein hu rabbanan the kiddushin mineh. Whenever someone gets married in the first place and does kiddushin, they say kedat Moshe v'Yisrael. So it's dependent on the will of the rabbis, and therefore the rabbis can retroactively undo that kiddushin. Right? You only got married based on our will and understanding, and now that at the end of this marriage you were sick and then you got better, and you made a directive and then you got better, but that's going to be confusing to people, and then they're going to think that you can make a divorce after death, and then they're going to go do that and act on that, and that will lead to all kinds of very serious problems. Therefore the rabbis say, oh, remember that kiddushin that you made? Oh, retroactively it's null and void. Amar le Ravina le Rav Ashe, tenach de kaddish bechaspa, kaddish bebi'ah ma'ika le'memar. So Ravina tells Rav Ashe, I understand the mechanism by which the rabbis can undo a kiddushin. See, it's not exactly a mechanism of a condition, but rather it's because the rabbis have the power over money, and hefker betin hefker. So the rabbis can retroactively say, remember that ring that you gave on your wedding day and said, right? That ring that you thought you owned, retroactively we say, oh, you don't own it, it's hefker. And if a man does kiddushin with something that he doesn't own, the kiddushin is invalid. So that's how they can invalidate the kiddushin, by making that ring not his anymore. But what if a person, nowadays we only do kiddushin with money, but what if, like in the olden days, one could do kiddushin with bi'ah? Then what can you do? How can the rabbis, it has nothing to do with the monetary, just the act of bi'ah for kiddushin, how can the rabbis undo that? The rabbis they can't undo the act, but they can redefine and say that act we redefine. You thought that was for the purpose of kiddushin. We now declare that it was just zinut. It was not for kiddushin. It was just licentious relations, and therefore you did not do kiddushin based on that. And that's how they can undo the marriage retroactively in that case. And they do that because they're concerned that people will think that in the other cases one could give a get after a death, but death actually ends the marriage, and there's no possibility of a get afterwards. So that's Rabbah and Rava. That's their disagreement with Rav Huna. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen ve'amen.